The mainstream media wants you to believe this is just another military exercise. They will tell you that coordinated drone deployments across three separate theaters of operation are routine, that simultaneous maneuvers involving Chinese Type 076 assault ships in the Taiwan Strait, Iranian Shahed 1-36 variants over the Persian Gulf, and North Korean reconnaissance units along the DMZ represent nothing more than coincidental training schedules. But what unfolded between February 14th and February 22nd of this year was not coincidence. It was coordination. And the silence from the Pentagon tells you everything you need to know about how deeply this rattled the foundation of American military doctrine. I have spent 4 decades analyzing Soviet and post-Soviet military strategy, first as a United States Marine Corps intelligence officer, then as a United Nations weapons inspector in Iraq, where I witnessed firsthand how conventional wisdom collapses when confronted with battlefield reality. What I am about to lay out for you is not speculation. It is pattern recognition built on technical capability assessment, logistics analysis, and the kind of operational coordination that does not happen by accident. On February 14th, Chinese naval forces deployed what initial reports characterized as 12 Type 076 amphibious assault ships from Hainan Island. That number is already a lie of omission. Those 12 ships carried a combined payload capacity exceeding 48,000 tons. But here is what the Defense Intelligence Agency briefings are not telling the American public. Each Type 076 is equipped with an electromagnetic catapult system specifically designed for unmanned combat aerial vehicle deployment. We are not talking about reconnaissance drones. We are talking about the GJ-11 Sharp Sword, a flying wing stealth UCAV with a combat radius of 4,000 kilometers and a payload capacity of 2,000 kilograms. The math is simple. 12 ships, each capable of deploying between 20 and 30 UCAVs in rapid succession, gives you a swarm potential of 360 units in the first wave alone. 48 hours later, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Forces conducted what Tehran officially described as defensive perimeter exercises in the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon press office issued a single-paragraph statement acknowledging awareness of the activity. What that statement did not mention was the deployment signature. Iranian forces launched Shahed 136 loitering munitions in groups of 50, maintaining interval spacing of exactly 12 minutes between each group. That is not defensive posture. That is saturation protocol. The Shahed 136 has a unit cost of approximately $20,000. It carries a warhead of 40 kilograms. Its maximum range is 2,500 kilometers. Iran demonstrated the ability to put 300 of these systems airborne across a 6-hour window. The target acquisition footage that leaked through Kurdish intelligence channels 3 days later showed those drones executing coordinated search patterns across a grid that precisely matched the deployment radius of the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. Now we arrive at the North Korean component, and this is where the operational picture becomes undeniable. On February 20th, Korean People's Army units along the demilitarized zone deployed what South Korean military intelligence initially assessed as 200 reconnaissance drones. That assessment was revised upward within 18 hours to 470 units. The revision was not due to improved counting methods. It was because North Korean forces demonstrated surge capacity that Western intelligence analysts had consistently underestimated. These were not hobby-grade quadcopters. Flight telemetry data recovered from 3 units that malfunctioned and crashed south of the DMZ revealed GPS modules, inertial navigation systems, and encrypted communication protocols operating on frequency bands that required coordination with Chinese Beidou satellite positioning architecture. Let me be absolutely clear about what that means. North Korea does not possess indigenous satellite navigation coverage. Their drone operations were being guided by Chinese military satellites. This was not North Korea acting independently. This was North Korea acting as the eastern anchor of a coordinated demonstration that spanned 7,000 kilometers of what the United States considers its sphere of operational dominance. The Pentagon went dark for 72 hours. No press briefings, no official statements beyond the bland acknowledgement I mentioned earlier. When Defense Secretary finally addressed the Senate Armed Services Committee on February 28th, his testimony consumed 11 minutes. He used the word exercise 9 times. He used the word coordination 0 times. That absence is the tell. When a career defense official with 4 decades of bureaucratic survival instinct refuses to use the operationally accurate term, you are looking at someone who has been instructed to manage perception rather than describe reality. Here is what coordination at this scale requires. First, synchronized intelligence preparation of the battlefield across 3 separate geographic commands. Chinese naval intelligence had to map every electromagnetic emission signature in the Western Pacific. Iranian aerospace forces had to correlate commercial shipping patterns with naval deployment schedules in the Persian Gulf. North Korean reconnaissance units had to update terrain databases along the DMZ that accounted for South Korean counter-drone installations deployed as recently as January. This is not data you generate in a week. This is months of preparation. Second, communications architecture capable of maintaining operational security across authoritarian command structures that do not trust each other. China and Iran have a strategic partnership grounded in energy economics and mutual opposition to American hegemony, but that partnership has never translated into integrated military command. North Korea is even more isolated, operating under a siege mentality that treats every external relationship as temporary convenience rather than alliance. For these 3 nations to execute coordinated operations within a 96-hour window requires communication protocols that were established, tested, and refined long before February. Third, logistics synchronization that accounts for seasonal variables, maintenance cycles, and fuel availability. The Chinese-type Aero 76 ships that deployed from Hainan Island were not sitting in port waiting for a spontaneous decision to sail. Those vessels require 72 hours minimum for pre-deployment checks, crew briefings, and stores loading. Iranian Shahed 136 systems require specialized handling during transport because their guidance packages are sensitive to humidity exposure. North Korean drone units operate in February cold that degrades battery performance and requires pre-flight warming procedures. All of this means the decision to execute these operations was made no later than early February, probably earlier. Fourth, and this is the element that should terrify anyone paying attention, integrated target selection that demonstrates shared understanding of American military vulnerabilities. The Chinese UCAVs were deployed along flight paths that would force Taiwanese air defense systems to choose between tracking high-altitude threats and maintaining coverage of low-altitude infiltration routes. The Iranian drones executed search patterns designed to overwhelm Aegis radar systems through sheer numerical saturation. The North Korean reconnaissance swarms probed gaps in the DMZ sensor network that South Korean forces only identified after the incursion was already underway. This is not 3 countries independently deciding to test American resolve. This is 3 countries pooling intelligence to identify and exploit the same systematic weaknesses. Now let us talk about what the Pentagon is actually afraid of, because the public statements and the internal assessments are 2 completely different documents. I have sources who have seen the after-action analysis that circulated through Indo-Pacific Command in early March. That assessment concluded that if the February demonstrations had been conducted as actual combat operations rather than shows of force, American defensive systems in the Western Pacific would have been overwhelmed within the first 4 hours. Not degraded. Overwhelmed. The Aegis combat system that forms the backbone of American naval air defense is designed to track and engage approximately 12 simultaneous targets per radar array. The Chinese alone put 360 potential targets into the operational space. You do not need advanced mathematics to understand that equation does not balance. The Iranian component exposes an even more fundamental vulnerability. American carrier strike groups are built around concentric defensive rings. The outer ring is provided by E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft that can detect threats at ranges exceeding 550 kilometers. The middle ring is Aegis cruisers and destroyers with SM-6 interceptors that can engage targets out to 460 kilometers. The inner ring is evolved Sea Sparrow missiles and close-in weapon systems designed for terminal defense. This architecture works beautifully against sophisticated threats that announce themselves early and present clear radar signatures. It collapses against swarm tactics using cheap, slow-moving platforms that blend into commercial traffic patterns until the moment of terminal approach. The Shahed 136 cruises at 190 kilometers per hour. It has a radar cross-section comparable to a large bird, and Iran just demonstrated the ability to put 300 of them into a target zone simultaneously. Every single one of those drones costs less than a single SM-6 interceptor. The economic mathematics of that exchange ratio should keep every naval planner awake at night. The North Korean piece completes a picture that Western military analysis has consistently refused to see. For 3 decades, the assessment of North Korean military capability has focused on their nuclear program and their aging conventional forces. Analysts point to their outdated tanks, their fuel-starved air force, their malnutrition-weakened infantry. All of that is true, and all of it is irrelevant to the operational reality that just manifested along the DMZ. North Korea does not need a sophisticated military to achieve operational effects in a modern conflict. They need the ability to overwhelm detection systems and create localized information blackouts. 470 drones executing coordinated reconnaissance is exactly that capability. Those drones do not need to carry weapons. They just need to force South Korean and American forces to divert attention, consume interceptor inventory, and create gaps that larger, slower, more vulnerable systems can exploit. This brings us to the question that the Senate Armed Services Committee did not ask, and the Defense Secretary was grateful to avoid. What happens when this is not a demonstration? What happens when Chinese UCAVs are not flying empty training profiles, but are loaded with anti-radiation missiles targeting Taiwanese radar installations? What happens when Iranian Shahed 136 units are not executing search patterns, but are programmed with GPS coordinates for desalination plants and oil terminals along the Saudi coast? What happens when North Korean reconnaissance drones are providing targeting data for artillery systems that have been pre-positioned and zeroed on American installations south of the DMZ? The answer is that American military doctrine has no effective response that does not escalate to levels of violence that create consequences nobody is prepared to accept. This is the paralysis. Not a physical inability to act, but a strategic recognition that every available action produces outcomes worse than the problem it attempts to solve. You can shoot down drones. The United States has the most sophisticated air defense network ever constructed, but you cannot shoot down 2,000 drones without expending interceptor inventory that costs billions of dollars to replace and requires months to manufacture. You cannot shoot down 2,000 drones without accepting that some percentage will penetrate your defenses. And you cannot shoot down 2,000 drones launched by 3 separate nations without making a decision about which target set represents the highest priority, which means accepting that the other two will achieve at least partial mission success. This is what paralysis looks like in modern military planning. It is not dramatic. It is not generals frozen in headlight panic. It is spreadsheet analysis that shows every course of action producing unacceptable loss ratios. It is logistics officers calculating that interceptor resupply timelines are measured in quarters while adversary drone production is measured in weeks. It is intelligence analysts presenting briefings that explain your opponents have found the gap between what your systems can theoretically do and what they can practically sustain. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond military capability assessment. What China, Iran, and North Korea demonstrated in February was not just technical proficiency. It was diplomatic coordination among nations that have historically viewed each other with suspicion. China has never fully trusted Iran's regional ambitions. Iran has never been comfortable with China's economic domination of their energy sector. North Korea trusts nobody. And yet all three executed operations that required months of preparation and absolute confidence that the others would fulfill their roles. That represents a level of strategic alignment that cannot be easily dismissed or disrupted. For American planners, this creates a multi-front problem that existing force structure cannot address. The United States military is designed for sequential engagement. Fight one major theater war while maintaining deterrence elsewhere. The February demonstration showed three potential theaters activating simultaneously, each employing tactics specifically designed to exploit the same systematic vulnerabilities. You cannot surge carrier strike groups to the Taiwan Strait and the Persian Gulf and the Korean Peninsula at the same time. You do not have enough carriers. Even if you did, you do not have enough escorts. Even if you had enough escorts, you do not have enough interceptor inventory to sustain operations across all three theaters against adversaries who have consciously chosen to compete in the domain where American technological advantage provides the least operational benefit. This is asymmetric warfare refined to its purest expression. Do not challenge American strengths in domains where they are unbeatable. Do not try to build better fighter jets or more capable submarines or longer-range missiles. Instead, build 10,000 cheap drones and force your opponent to choose between bankruptcy and vulnerability. The cost exchange ratio is so lopsided that it does not matter if 90% of your systems are destroyed. The 10% that get through will achieve enough operational effect to justify the expenditure. And your opponent will have spent 50 times as much money defending against the attack as you spent executing it. The silence from Washington since February is not accidental. It is the sound of strategic reassessment happening in real time. Every assumption about American military dominance in the Pacific, the Middle East, and Northeast Asia is being stress tested against an operational reality that those assumptions did not account for. The reassessment is not complete and the conclusions are not yet formalized, but the direction is already clear. The United States cannot maintain its current force posture across all three theaters against opponents who are now actively coordinating to exploit its limitations. Something will have to give. Either force structure will be restructured, which means pulling back from commitments that have been treated as foundational for decades, or defense budgets will increase to levels that create domestic political crises, or risk tolerance will expand to accept vulnerability in areas previously considered non-negotiable. None of those options are politically palatable, which is why you are not hearing about them in public discourse. But the conversations are happening in classified briefing rooms where maps now show threat vectors that did not exist in previous planning cycles. The February demonstrations did not change the military balance of power overnight. What they changed was the perception of where that balance sits and how quickly it can shift when opponents coordinate effectively. We are looking at the early stages of a new strategic framework that treats coordination among authoritarian states not as temporary convergence of interest, but as durable architecture for challenging American hegemony. China provides technological backbone and satellite infrastructure. Iran provides geographic positioning that threatens global energy choke points. North Korea provides unpredictable localized threat that forces resource diversion. Together they create a problem set that is greater than the sum of its parts because it forces simultaneous response across theaters that have never been required to compete for the same limited assets. The drones are just the visible manifestation. The real shift is in the willingness of nations that have historically operated independently to pool intelligence, coordinate timing, and execute operations that require mutual trust. That trust may be tactical rather than strategic. It may be limited to specific operational domains rather than broad alliance structure. But it exists, and it was demonstrated at a scale that cannot be ignored. February was not the end of this process. It was the beginning. The next demonstration will be more sophisticated. The coordination will be tighter. The exploitation of American vulnerabilities will be more precise, and the Pentagon response will be even more constrained because every option will be measured against an opponent who has now proven they can act in concert across multiple theaters simultaneously. This is what paradigm shift looks like in military affairs. Not a single dramatic moment, but a accumulation of technical capabilities and strategic coordination that forces complete reassessment of assumptions that have guided policy for generations. The United States has not yet lost a war because of these developments, but the conditions are being established for conflicts where American victory is no longer assured, where operational success requires costs that domestic populations are unwilling to bear, and where adversaries have identified paths to achieving their objectives without directly defeating American forces in conventional engagement. Watch what happens next. Watch whether the Pentagon requests supplemental appropriations for interceptor production. Watch whether carrier deployment schedules start showing longer sustainment periods in theater. Watch whether diplomatic language around Taiwan, the Persian Gulf, and the Korean Peninsula becomes more carefully hedged. Those will be the indicators that internal assessments have concluded the February demonstrations revealed vulnerabilities that cannot be quickly addressed. The drones were a message. The Pentagon received it, and the response is taking shape in ways the public will not see until the next crisis forces decisions that can no longer be deferred.